I was 10 feet from the blast when the fake HOA cops set off my tripwire. One minute they were smirking at my front gate. The next, one of them was howling on the ground soaked in red paint, fish oil, and justice. They thought they were coming to inspect my ranch. They didn't know I'd spent the last month turning it into a legally protected minefield. When the sirens wailed in the distance and one of them reached for his fake badge, I didn't flinch. I just smirked. You ever watch a trespasser realize too late they just walked into the wrong man's land? The first one showed up on a Tuesday. I was on my porch with a cup of black coffee, watching the sun rise slow and gold over the hills of my ranch when I saw the glint, something metallic catching the early light from beyond my eastern fence line. I squinted, and there he was. A man, maybe mid-40s, wearing what looked like a tactical vest, cargo pants, and a navy blue ball cap embroidered with the letters HOA. Enforcement Unit. He had a clipboard in one hand and a phone in the other, scanning, tapping, and taking photos like he was building a case. My property line was marked, barbed fence, private land signs every 50 feet, but he wasn't deterred. He didn't step over the fence, not yet, just stood at the edge like a coyote, testing a boundary it meant to ignore soon enough. I called out to him, "You need something?" I didn't raise my voice, just made it carry. He turned like he hadn't expected to be addressed, gave a lazy wave. "Routine compliance check," he said. "You're on the list." That was the first red flag. There is no list. I never signed the HOA agreement. When this ranch came into my hands, it was grandfathered out of the development covenants. The association tried to rope me in once 5 years ago. I sent them a letter through my attorney, citing the original land division agreement and agricultural exemption. Never heard back. Until now. "What list?" I asked, stepping off the porch, slow and deliberate. He adjusted his vest, pulled out what looked like a badge, and flashed it like a magician doing a cheap trick. Plastic. Black and gold with Community Standards Patrol printed across it like it meant something. "You'll want to get those fence posts retreated," he added, pointing his clipboard toward the west side of the pasture. "They're showing signs of weather damage. Also, your barn roof may not be code compliant, reflective paint requirement." I stared at him, didn't blink. "You planning to cross that fence, mister?" He gave a half smile, the kind that thinks it's smarter than you. "No need, just observing for now." Then he turned and walked off like he owned the place. Like this was the start of something and not already a declaration of war. The next day there were two of them, one with a GoPro mounted to his vest, the other holding a laser measurer and jotting notes into a battered spiral-bound notebook. This time, they came from the south side, an access trail that cuts behind the dry creek bed where the county easement runs through. It's public right-of-way, but they weren't sticking to the trail. They were 30 feet into my pasture, standing under my windmill, pointing up at the blades and mumbling to each other like they'd found buried treasure. I took the quad bike and rolled up on them. Didn't say anything at first, just let the roar of the engine do the talking. When they turned, I could see they were wearing matching windbreakers with the letters OA Sec Ops on the chest in faux military stencil font. Not law enforcement, not even municipal. But they carried themselves like hired guns with state licenses. I cut the engine. "You're on private land," I said. "This isn't under your jurisdiction." The taller one, bearded and sunburned, lifted a laminated sheet from his binder. "According to Section 14, Article 9 of the Compliance Code, we're authorized to assess any structural elements visible from public view for violations." "This isn't public," I shot back. "And there is no Article 9. That code doesn't exist in this county." The shorter one with the GoPro just smirked and kept filming. "Then you've got nothing to worry about, right?" he said. I stood there, a full minute without speaking. Not because I was stunned, but because I was calculating, measuring, every inch of where they stood, every path they took to get here. They walked off again without apology, without urgency, like they were cataloging a museum and I was just part of the scenery. That night, I installed new trail cams. Motion activated, infrared capable, all pointing outward from my barn, my wellhead, and my livestock pens. I wasn't paranoid. I was preparing. By Friday, They were driving past daily. Black side-by-sides with magnetic decals that read, Community Enforcement Detail. One had a dash-mounted tablet displaying aerial views, maybe satellite images, maybe drone footage. I couldn't tell. Each time they passed the house, they slowed to a crawl, rolled down their windows, and stared. They never waved, never spoke, just watched. I called the sheriff that evening, told him what was happening, gave names, plate numbers, even a time-stamped USB with footage of the trespass. The deputy I spoke to was polite but cautious. They haven't stepped over the fence again? He asked. They have. Twice. I've got it on camera. Do they have weapons? Just clipboards and cameras, I said. And attitudes like they're above the law. He sighed. We've had calls like this before. HOA patrols acting like real cops. Technically, it's not illegal unless they impersonate law enforcement or make a threat. But if they're on your land, that's trespass. We can file a report, but you'll need to issue a formal notice first. A notice? I repeated. For trespassers? That's the law, sir, he said. First, you post. Then, you warn. Then, we act. It was theater. Bureaucratic choreography to avoid touching the political hot wire that was the county's increasingly rogue HOAs. We'll keep an eye on it, he added. But unless they come back armed or aggressive, there's not much we can do. My blood went cold. Not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. If they did come back armed, the sheriff's department was already admitting they'd arrived too late. The next morning, there were 3 of them. Same blue vests, same sunglasses. But this time they parked at the far end of the south paddock and set up a tripod-mounted scanner. It looked military-grade. One of those LiDAR mapping rigs you see used in forestry or tactical assessments. I watched them from the barn, silent, seething, letting the camera on the loft beam record every second. One of them walked toward the chicken coop, pointed, nodded, then gestured toward my diesel tank. That's when I lost it. I stepped out from the barn, loud and visible, carrying nothing but a wrench in my left hand. You just bought yourself a felony, I shouted. This is documented trespass. You've been warned and now you're recorded. The one in front, older, bald, with a scar running down his temple, held up both hands like he was calming a suspect. Sir, we're acting under HOA compliance code. There is no code that gives you access to this land, I barked. I'm not part of your HOA. Never was. You cross my fence line again, and it won't be cameras that greet you. The others paused, unsure. Then the leader leaned in. You're acting hostile, he said. That'll be noted in our report. He tapped his fake badge like it had any weight. We're authorized to report behavioral threats to the board. Board can kiss my land lease, I said. You're standing on ranch property protected under federal ag use. Step off now. They did. Slowly. But not because I scared them. Because they weren't finished. They were probing, testing, and they were getting bolder. That evening, my mailbox had a new letter. No return address. Just enforcement notice typed in all caps. I opened it under the porch light, and the rage hit me like a slap. Dear occupant, your property has been flagged for multiple Tier 2 violations, including unapproved fencing materials, non-compliant agricultural signage, and the presence of mechanical structures exceeding reflectivity standards. Failure to comply within 14 business days will result in HOA Action Protocol C. No statute, no legal basis, just language. Threatening, polished, and entirely fake. They weren't enforcing rules. They were writing their own. That was when I stopped thinking of them as rule enforcers. They were infiltrators. Acting under a shield of community jargon and unofficial uniforms, they had become something more dangerous than any common criminal. Zealots with clipboards, trespassing under the guise of order. They had no oversight, no accountability, and no idea who they were dealing with. But I knew who I was. I wasn't angry. I was calculating. I wasn't unarmed. I was unread. And I wasn't done. Not even close. It started with the chickens. The day after that last confrontation in the paddock, I woke up to find a bright orange tag stapled to the door of the coop. Biohazard risk, prohibited livestock conditions, HOA violation code. 117B. I read it twice, then 3 times. There was no code 117B, and even if there were, my birds had cleaner bedding than the average motel. It wasn't a real notice. It was theater again. But this time they weren't just taking pictures or measuring fence posts. They had stepped onto my land and laid hands on what was mine. I checked the perimeter and found 2 sets of boot prints by the southern fence where the wire dips near the gully. They had cut the barbed strand and rolled it back under the shadow of the cottonwood trees, hidden from my nearest trail cam. I rewound the footage anyway. One of them must have known the blind spot. I called the sheriff's department again and left a message marked urgent. That night, nobody called back. 3 days later, my goats went missing. I'd fed them at sunset like I always do, left the pasture gate latched and chained, and went inside just after dusk. By morning, the gate was hanging open like someone had used bolt cutters on the lock. The chain was gone. 3 of my boar does, Snowball, Cinnamon, and Ivy, vanished. I found one of their collars in the dry creek bed a quarter mile away, snapped clean. No tracks I could follow, no blood. Just a swath of flattened grass where something or someone had driven in from the wrong side. I followed the trail until it met the tire marks. Deep, aggressive treads in the dirt. Off-road vehicle. Wide stance. Same pattern as the community enforcement detail rig I'd seen the week prior. They'd come in the night, not to issue fake citations or posture with badges, but to steal. Livestock theft wasn't just a nuisance. It was a felony in this county, but good luck proving it when the perpetrators were ghosts with HOA logos and no names on file. I called again. No answer. My voicemail was full of apologies from real deputies and empty promises of follow-ups. They knew what I was dealing with. They just didn't want to be the ones to deal with it. My wife, Callie, said nothing when she found out. She just grabbed the Louisville Slugger from the garage and set it by the nightstand. That was the first night we locked the bedroom door in our own home. That was also the last night either of us slept more than 2 hours in a row. The dogs wouldn't settle. The horses twitched and snorted all night. Something was changing. Something was shifting from petty to personal. It wasn't about fences or barn paint anymore. It was about control, domination, territory, the way a wolf pisses on a stump to make a claim. Except this pack was armed with rules they invented, and a twisted sense of power that came from wearing nylon vests and calling themselves officers. The next hit came without warning. My niece Hannah, 15 and fire-eyed like her mother used to be, had come to stay for the week. She loved walking the property, sketching in her notepad, and talking to the goats like they were Disney characters. I told her to stay on the main trails, stay visible, but it didn't matter. She came running back to the house one afternoon, face flushed, notebook crumpled in her hands. "They stopped me," she said, breath hitching. "Said I was loitering on HOA property, called me a potential witness. They asked if my parents were around. Her parents were in Arizona. They knew damn well she was my niece. They'd seen her on the cameras. This wasn't mistaken identity. It was intimidation. On a child." That night, I checked the trail footage from the creek path again. Same guy, bearded, bald, same smug posture. This time, he wasn't measuring anything. He was walking right up to my barn. Not through the gate, through the back, under the shadows, with a flashlight in his mouth and something in his hand. I paused the frame when he looked at the lens. The bastard smiled. A full, confident, soulless grin like he was posing for a yearbook photo. I leaned in closer. Behind him, something glinted, spray paint, fluorescent orange. Next morning, I found it. The side of my water tank tagged in massive block letters, non-compliant. My well, my primary source, defaced by fake cops with a god complex. I walked the entire perimeter that day, every fence post, every gate, every trail, and I found what they'd left behind. 3 motion-activated compliance sensors, zip tied to trees. DIY surveillance junk wrapped in black duct tape and bearing stickers with the HOA crest. I ripped them out one by one, dropped them into a metal drum, and burned them until the plastic hissed and melted like poison. That was the first fire I'd lit in weeks, and it felt good to see something of theirs burn. The next move came quietly. An envelope in the mailbox, this time with a return address from Oak Run Community Standards Committee. Inside was a thick packet of papers, photos of my ranch. Circles drawn in red Sharpie over my windmill, my dog run, even the shed where I keep emergency hay. A cover letter read, "Your property has been escalated to Tier 3 non-compliance. Failure to adhere to HOA guidelines may result in disciplinary enforcement, up to and including forfeiture of neighborhood privileges and formal lien initiation." There was a fake barcode on the bottom, a signature from someone named Officer P. Ryland, Director of Enforcement. I flipped to the final page. It listed a schedule of visitations. Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. They weren't just harassing me. They were planning a calendar of raids, visits, violations, and they were daring me to respond. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch in the dark with a thermos of black coffee and a loaded Mossberg across my lap. I wasn't aiming to use it, but I wasn't aiming to flinch either. Callie came out at 2:17 a.m. in her robe, barefoot, bat still in hand. She didn't say anything, just looked at me for a long time. Then she sat beside me, silent. The wind stirred, dry and mean. Somewhere in the field, the coyotes yipped. But even they knew better than to come this close tonight. These men wanted a reaction. They wanted me to lunge, to snap, to break a rule they could twist against me. They wanted a headline that read, "Angry Rancher Assaults HOA Officers." But I wasn't giving them that. No, I was going to give them something better. Something colder. Something permanent. By Sunday morning, I was done reacting. I started drawing. Plans. Schematics. Wiring diagrams. Trigger zones. I called Walt, my old friend from the service, who once rigged a convoy truck with nothing but lawnmower parts and a timing watch. "You busy?" I asked. "Not if it's war," he said. I didn't respond. He knew. They'd crossed the line with the goats, with my niece, with the coop. But they made their biggest mistake when they thought silence was surrender. What they didn't understand was that my quiet wasn't fear. It was calculation. I wasn't just watching. I was measuring, timing, plotting. And every second they stayed comfortable was a second closer to when that comfort would be detonated, legally, surgically, and in full compliance with my rules. They wanted chaos. I'd give them order. And they were going to learn the hard way what happens when you push a quiet man too far on his own land. I printed everything. Every still frame, every license plate photo, every time-stamped clip of the fake HOA cops stomping across my land like they were reclaiming a crime scene they never owned. My kitchen became a war room, maps spread across the table, surveillance screenshots taped to cabinets, folders stuffed with incident logs and drone captures. I cataloged them all by date, time, direction of entry, and number of personnel. The trespasses weren't random anymore. They were strategic, a pattern. Always after dark, or just before dawn, always with the same rotation of 3 to 5 men. I had clips of them planting more of their compliance sensors, and one shot of the bald one smirking into my West Cam lens at 2:41 a.m., like it was all just a joke. But it wasn't funny anymore. My goats were still missing. My niece refused to go outside. My wife had started checking every window before she showered. This wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. On Monday morning, I took it all, binder in hand, USB loaded with unedited footage, and walked it straight into the sheriff's department. The desk deputy, Sanders, was young, new, and clearly not ready for a man with bloodshot eyes and a $1,000 folder full of proof. "Sir, if you'll have a seat." "No," I said, calm but firm. "I'm not leaving until a supervisor sees this." He hesitated, then tapped his phone. 10 minutes later, Sergeant Delaney stepped into the room. He was decent, older, a straight shooter, with the look of a man who still believed the system worked if you gave it time. I laid out the files on the table like they were evidence at trial. "These men are not law enforcement," I said. "They are harassing my family, sabotaging my livestock, vandalizing my infrastructure. And they are doing it under the pretense of HOA authority I never agreed to. and that does not legally extend to my land." Delaney flipped through a few pages, eyes narrowing. "You're sure they're not deputized?" "Positive. They're private citizens, wearing tactical vests and impersonating officers." I tapped one of the stills. "This one has a fake badge and a holster. No ID. No warrant." He leaned back, scratched his temple. "I'll admit, this is concerning. But unless they're actively brandishing weapons or making threats, the DA's office probably won't pursue impersonation." "So what?" I asked. "They have to shoot at me before you'll intervene?" "No," he said, quieter now, "but it helps." I left the station with nothing but a hollow promise to escalate the file to the county legal team. No case number, no arrest. No patrol car headed to the HOA office to shut them down. Just paperwork and delay. I drove straight to the county recorder's office next, asked for land zoning confirmation, exemption status, and original tract covenants. It was all still there, black and white proof that my property was excluded from HOA control since 1998. That should have been enough. I handed it to the clerk, along with a formal complaint against the Oak Run Homeowners Association. She read it, nodded politely, and dropped it into a file tray with 24 others. "Estimated response time?" I asked. 6 to 8 weeks. "That's how long it takes to stop armed trespassers now?" She didn't answer. Just clicked her mouse and said, "Next." I went to the local news station. Small-time place. One reporter on duty, sipping a latte and pretending he wasn't hungover. "Sounds like a great human interest piece," he said, eyes glazing over the third drone clip. "But unless they pull a gun or someone ends up in a hospital, we can't really run it on the 6 o'clock. Too niche." "You think paramilitary HOA patrols are niche?" I asked. "You think this ends with goats?" He shrugged. "It's all he said," she said, "unless there's a body or a court date. HOA stories don't move clicks. Nobody understands the laws." "The law's the problem," I muttered, collecting my things. "Yeah," he said, not looking up. "That's what they all say." That night, I sat on my porch and stared out at the fence line. Somewhere out there, one of them was watching. I could feel it. That heat behind the ribs that tells you you're being hunted but not attacked. Not yet. I opened my laptop and reread every page of the county code. Agricultural defense clauses. Perimeter protection allowances. Right to deny access rules. I searched for one thing. Anything that would let me throw up a wall they couldn't cross, but the legal perimeter was useless. Like trying to hold back a flood with caution tape. These HOA zealots didn't operate inside the law, they operated around it. Not because they had power, but because no one dared challenge the illusion that they did. They acted like cops. Talked like bureaucrats. And no one wanted to be the first one to call them out for what they really were. A uniformed cult built on fear, repetition, and fine print no one could read. I wasn't dealing with a homeowners association. I was dealing with a rogue regime. Their power didn't come from ordinances. It came from exhaustion. From how many people they could wear down before someone snapped. My neighbor Paul told me he once got fined for having a canoe leaned against his garage on private land. He paid it just to avoid the 15 letters and the threat of a lien. Missy, the baker's wife down the hill, said her security lights were ruled too industrial and had to be removed even though their daughter had been followed home from school. People didn't fight back. Not because they agreed, but because the system was built to make resistance feel like drowning in paperwork. That's when it hit me. They don't need real authority if no one ever questions it. Fine. If the legal wall won't hold them, I'll build one they can't bypass. Not with citations, not with threats, not even with guns. I'll use the one thing they've never seen before, an order they can't understand. My order. Walt showed up that night with his truck bed full of gear. "Still want to go the paperwork route?" he asked. I tossed him the rejected complaint letter from the county. "Not anymore." He smiled. "Good, because I brought toys." By morning, the cameras were no longer just documenting. They were predicting. I installed pressure sensors under the gravel trails, camouflaged in river rock. Walt set up directional mics in the trees, tuned to pick up whisper range conversation. "They talk like cowards," he said. always under their breath. You'll hear them before you see them. I laid magnetic trip switches in the pasture gates, legally defined as livestock motion alerts under Section 11 of the Ranch Operations Code. Perfectly compliant, perfectly weaponized, I posted new signage on every boundary. Restricted Agricultural Buffer Zone, entry without permit prohibited under County Code 447.19. Not real enforcement, but it looked real enough. Language was their weapon. Now I spoke it too. I filed a notice of property access denial with the county land office. It didn't do anything, but it added a layer of bureaucracy that meant if one of these patrol goons ended up in court, I had a time-stamped record proving I had refused all contact. It was evidence. It was slow legal poison. The HOA didn't respond directly, but their patrols doubled. 2 side-by-sides, then 3. Now in formation. Flashing yellow lights. Clipboards held high like they were surveying a battlefield. But they weren't surveying anymore. They were waiting. For me to make the mistake. For me to pull the trigger first. They didn't know I already had. A week later, I got a letter, not from the HOA, but from a law firm in town, Whitaker, Griggs, Bell. It was a cease and desist, demanding I immediately dismantle unlawful obstruction measures and surveillance infrastructure currently deployed within shared community airspace. Airspace. These bastards were trying to claim air. My drone footage had rattled them. Good. I responded with a counterclaim citing federal drone law, FAA altitude limits, and 3 Supreme Court decisions on air rights over private land. My letter was dry, boring, and legally bulletproof. I CC'd every official from county records to state agricultural enforcement. I included diagrams. I used their language. And I made damn sure they knew I wasn't bluffing. But it wasn't about court anymore. Not for them, not for me. This had become something bigger than goats or barns or fake badges. It was about principle. It was about reclaiming a boundary they had erased, inch by inch, with paperwork and silence. They used confusion like a weapon. I'd use clarity like a sword. My land didn't need fences anymore. It needed conviction. So I drew the new line. Not in chalk, not in barbed wire, but in resolve. Let them come. Let them try. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The law may have failed me, but I hadn't failed myself. And I hadn't failed this land. Not yet. The first thing I did was disappear, on paper at least. I pulled my land from the county's public-facing parcel database. It's a loophole most people don't know exists. If your land is zoned for active agriculture and falls under conservation or historical utility use, you can request to have aerial mapping data scrubbed from public GIS layers. Takes a few phone calls, a notarized affidavit, and just enough bureaucratic patience to outlast a clerk on their lunch break. Once that was done, I filed a property use modification request under obscure state code 447.19, something called an agricultural buffer reclamation zone. In layman's terms, a designation that turned my property into a restricted mixed-use livestock, soil study, and conservation development site. It meant 2 things. 1. No public access without a state-issued permit. 2. Any unauthorized presence could be classified as an ecological violation. In their world, that's a 50 fine and a slap on the wrist. In mine, it's the tripwire for a full-scale counteroffensive, and they just gave me legal justification to go nuclear. Walt came out with a truck loaded to the gills. PVC pipes, camo netting, plastic drums full of paint, noise deterrents, and a bundle of laminated signs that read, "Warning, active conservation area, no entry, State Code 447.19. We walked the fence line like old soldiers on patrol, laying the bones of what we both knew would be our final play. We didn't need it to be violent. We needed it to be loud. Unforgettable. We started with the deterrents. Paint mines, compressed canisters, wired with trip sensors, filled with biodegradable livestock-safe red and green pigments. They were technically area marking systems for wildlife studies. That's what the state paperwork said. What it didn't say was that when triggered, They exploded with a 10-foot blast radius of viscous humiliation. Sirens came next, salvaged from old farm equipment, tuned with animal distress recordings. One blast, and you'd swear you were being chased by 1,000 enraged goats. Then the lights. Strobe arrays set to flicker in unpredictable patterns, legal under zoning code 17.3 because they were wildlife deterrent illumination devices. In practice, they looked like SWAT flashbangs without the boom. Inside the barn, we mounted a new server array and hardwired every cam to upload in real time to 3 cloud locations, a private YouTube livestream, and 1 direct feed folder labeled Auto Forward. County Comms. I called in a favor from Mia, Callie's cousin, now an assistant state attorney general. She was smart, surgical, and hated HOA corruption with a passion that bordered on religious. "You'll have your cease and desist in 72 hours, she promised. "But if they breach before then?" "Just make sure there's video. Lots of it." We installed decoy traps, too. Things that looked dangerous but weren't. Barb nets that swung down with a whoosh, netting that made noise but didn't catch, sensor-triggered water sprayers rigged from old irrigation systems. Every single piece was signed off by local code as part of crop protection infrastructure. By the end of the week, my ranch looked the same from a distance, but walked like a maze of humiliation and consequence if you stepped off the path. And still, they kept circling. Each day the patrols passed slower. Each time, their eyes lingered longer on the new signs. They were close to cracking, but they didn't want to blink first. They needed a reason, so I gave them one. I printed a new banner and hung it just beyond the main gate, centered between 2 cameras. It read, "Property owner has initiated legal action against unauthorized HOA military-style patrols. Trespassers will be publicly identified and prosecuted." Below it was the email of the state AG's office. And then I waited. It didn't take long. Friday, 4:37 p.m. I saw the dust plume first, 2 side-by-sides, one black, one sand-colored with a newly painted stripe. They rolled up like they owned the place, tactical vests on full display, and stopped at the main gate. They didn't even try subtlety. I was on the porch with a glass of iced tea and a live monitor feed running through my phone. "They're coming," I said into the mic. Walt was already in position in the barn loft. "Party time," he replied. The bald one stepped off first, Ray, I'd learned his name was, the unofficial field commander of this HOA enforcement cult. Behind him came another goon I hadn't seen before, younger, beefier, likely hired to carry clipboards and menace people with the IQ of wet cardboard. And then her, Karen Stiles, HOA president, clad in an off-white blazer, sunglasses the size of her ego, and holding a tablet like it was the scepter of a dying monarch. They strode to the gate, muttering, pointing at my signs. Karen barked something I couldn't hear. Ray opened the latch. My internal counter clicked to 0. They had officially crossed the line. The second Ray's boot touched gravel inside my fence. He triggered the pressure plate. Boom! The first paint mine exploded in a glorious red fountain, coating his legs and chest like he just tried to rob a fire truck. The rookie stepped back in shock, right into the net trigger. Whoosh! A barbed net shot down from a tree branch and wrapped around his shoulders, knocking him flat onto his back with a yelp. The sirens started next, screeching, guttural, and impossibly loud. Karen stumbled back, shrieking as the strobe lights popped off around her like paparazzi in a hostage situation. She dropped her tablet, stumbled over Ray, and landed face first into a puddle of bright green marking dye. And all of it streamed live. My YouTube broadcast, titled HOA Cult Patrol Gets Publicly Humbled, live, hit 0 viewers in under 2 minutes. County officials watching, local news watching. I had forwarded the link to every sheriff's deputy, state agriculture official, and legal inbox I could think of. And the best part? I walked out slow, calm, no weapon. Just the cease and desist letter in my hand, signed by the state AG and freshly notarized. Karen looked up from the dirt, coughing dye and ego, and froze when she saw me. This is illegal. This is criminal entrapment," she sputtered, slipping as she tried to stand. "No," I said. holding out the letter. This is a fully documented agricultural perimeter response under state conservation law. And you, Karen, are the one trespassing. She stared at the letter, pale now beneath the dye. This can't be. It is, I said, stepping aside to show her the live stream ticker. 15,432 viewers. And climbing. The sirens began to die down just as the sheriff's cruiser rolled in. 2 cars. Lights spinning but no sirens. Delaney stepped out first. He looked around the yard like a man who had stepped into a very expensive performance of karma. Good evening, I said. We have some guests. Delaney didn't smile, but he didn't frown either. He turned to Karen, to Ray, to the rookie still tangled in netting. Ma'am, sir, you're all being detained for trespass and impersonation. We'll sort the rest out at the station. Karen fainted. No drama, no warning, just crumpled like her spine gave out from sheer disbelief. The rookie whimpered something about wanting to go home. Ray tried to stand but slipped in the paint. Delaney sighed. Get paramedics for the president, and zip-tie the rest. As they were led away, I handed over the USB backups, the written logs, and the notarized land zoning declarations. The legal trap had sprung tighter than a bear jaw. And the moment it hit local news, the real headline followed. Illegal HOA police force busted by ranchers livestream. Attorney General opened statewide investigation into suburban militia enforcement units. Within a week, the Oak Run HOA board was dissolved. Investigations spread to 6 other communities. Karen was charged with impersonation, false authority use, and ecological vandalism. Ray got booked under impersonation of law enforcement. The rookie cut a deal to testify. Walt and I sat on the porch a few nights later, watching the sun drip gold over the clean fence line. You really did it, he said, sipping from a thermos marked official compliance fluid. I didn't reply. Just smiled and watched the grass sway. My land was quiet now. The chaos was over. The signs stayed up, but the paint mines were gone. The cameras still rolled, but now just for wildlife. The system failed me, so I built my own. And when the wolves came calling in cheap vests and empty badges, they learned something simple and permanent. Some land can't be governed. Some men don't fold. And some fences don't keep you out. They keep you in, until the truth exposes everything. And when the dust settles, the only thing left standing is the man who never moved.